Sometimes you have to dig really deep to even notice a film score, even if it's a great one. And in the case of The Zone of Interest, the film score by Micah Levy is so good. And it's right up in your face in the opening minute. There's just kind of a blank screen. And it kind of reminds me of the West Side Story opening a little bit, where you're sitting there and the way it's presented to you, you're in a situation where you have to listen. You can't do anything else. But as I was watching it, the question for me became, clearly sound is important here, but how important is it going to be when it comes to telling the story of the movie? So firstly, it's not just the film score sounds I'm talking about. I'm talking about all of the sounds of the movie and how they interact with each other and with the storyline. So it's not just the film score, but it's also the things that the Foley artist is doing and how that's telling the story. Quick side note, the Foley artist is what's referred to as the person who's making all of the everyday sounds of the movie, like a car door shutting or people walking and so on. So to illustrate what I'm talking about, I want to point out two moments in the movie, two sound moments that I think elevate the entire movie to another level. Just a quick synopsis, because it's going to matter. The context of these sound moments is going to matter. The film centers on the domestic life of Hedwig and Rudolf Höss, who is the commandant of Auschwitz, as they strive to build a dream life for their family in a house and garden next to the camp during World War II. Their family home is nestled between train tracks and gas chambers, and is literally on the other side of the wall from Auschwitz, the infamous German concentration camp located in occupied Poland. Towards the final days of the Holocaust, Hedwig is fixated on self-preservation while Rudolf is increasingly burdened by his duties as commandant. We reside inside the family's encampment with background voices and a blending of sound art and the horrors of the camp merging together to tell a story. So we're watching the horrors of what went on, but from the perspective of the house and the family. So the mother and the servants are watching and bathing and feeding the children, and we're seeing everything from that perspective. And of course, quickly we start to hear background sounds of the camp, like gunfire and screaming, and it's starting to blend into the everyday life of what we're witnessing. And so the first amazing sound moment I want to point out is directly in reference to this. There's a moment somewhere in the middle of the movie where a woman is cleaning a room and you hear the occasional gunshot going off, streaming in from the window. Now she's walking back and forth in the room and we're hearing the gunfire coming from a distance but through the window. Obviously it's coming from the concentration camp. But there's a moment where she steps on a floorboard and it creaks. But the amazing thing is, and it's really fast, so you have to kind of pay attention to it, the creaking of the floorboard sounds very much, almost exactly like the gunfire. Now, to my kooky little brain, I found that a super interesting connection between what's happening in the camp and what's happening in the house. The blending is like a metaphor of the two of them merging together. So the sound of the creaks in the floorboard and the sound of the gunfire sounding basically the same, to me, is like a symbol of you can be in the house and you can try to deny what's happening on the other side of the wall and pretend like everything's okay and that you're doing what you think is the right thing to do. But the horrors of what's happening are going to find their way into your life. They're going to find their way into your conscious. They're going to find a way into your mind. And you can't ignore it. And the way that it creeps in is through the sound. The other amazing sound moment is when the little girl in the family plays a song on the piano with no words, even though there are subtitles. Just before this happens, though, we see a very strange but beautiful visual image of this girl who looks like she's sneakily planting sugar cubes in the ground. Now, sugar cubes was mentioned in the movie prior to this, briefly. And so I'm not sure if she's dreaming or if she's actually doing this and she's doing it near the wall in a wooded area, or maybe she found a way into the camp. I'm not sure, but it looks like she's planting sugar cubes and that she's disturbed by what she hears. And this is some sort of a loving gesture, any kind of a gesture that she can make to say that she knows exactly what's going on. But the interesting thing about the imagery as well is that it's like night vision, but it's not green, it's white. So in my strange little mind, I thought it's kind of an interesting thing to think about it as white knight vision. Not like night like day and night, but as in white knight, saving the day. And the reason that I say that is because the song that plays after she does this has the lyrics "Flag of Freedom," and it appears meant from the perspective of the poor souls in the camp who are waiting to be rescued. And I took the Flag of Freedom, of course, to mean maybe the US, yes, but also probably the Allied forces in general. So what's interesting about this song is that we move from hearing it while she's planting the sugar cubes into a scene of her sitting at the piano playing it. And because there are subtitles, it's interesting to think about the fact that there isn't a voice. It's clearly a piece of music that has a melody and that's written for what seems like piano and voice, but there's no singing. It's just the subtitles, which to me I took as a really powerful metaphor, as a comment on the voiceless. Like, you have this beautiful moment that's coming from the perspective of the people in the camp, but you're not hearing the voice because nobody's helping them. And so it's not just a powerful moment in the film, I think it's also a powerful sound moment as well. And those are just a couple of examples. I could have used so many others to illustrate the point of the sound being a crucial element in this movie. For example, like when they have the flower montage scene, it's maybe 3/4 of the way through, they're showing these shots of these different beautiful flowers, but instead of, what you might think beautiful music or choral music, it's the sounds of screams from the camp. And I hate to use the word harmony because I feel like harmony is reserved almost for like beautiful sounds, but it is kind of like a cognitive dissonant harmony, in that you've got these shots of these beautiful flowers with the unthinkable horrors of people screaming. And so it almost becomes like a beautiful harmony telling an absolutely tragic, horrible, unthinkable story. Now, I would have to listen to the soundtrack on its own while I'm in my studio working on things for a year or two before I could say whether I thought the film score on its own stood up to, the Mount Rushmore of film scores. To me, those are things like Interstellar, Ad Astra, There Will Be Blood, so many others. So we'll have to make another video in the future about that. But when it comes to telling the story, this particular story, I think it's one of the main reasons that it got nominated for an Academy Award for Best Picture, because it does take it to another level. Now, on its own, if you had a completely different film score, is it still a good movie? Yeah, absolutely. But I think it's so much better because of these things. And just to help illustrate how important sound is to a movie, Orson Welles once said something really interesting about the importance of film scores and music when it comes to creating visuals and making movies. He said, quote, "I believe sound is the first human sense for the theater, not the eye. I think the first theater was a story told by a storyteller, and it's a voice. The voice determines it, and the rhythm of the voice determines the images."